Good.
Okay. It's a little bit awkward beginning after that, but obviously our thoughts are with the family, and as Mark said, more information will come as soon as it's available. Wanted to speak a little bit tonight about Yom Yerushalayim. Yom Yerushalayim tonight and tomorrow is Yom Yerushalayim. I'm going to expand a little bit on something which I mentioned this afternoon at the lunch, for those who were there. You know, I mentioned today, many of you are not at the lunch, that what we celebrate on this day and what's being fulfilled, really, we have the fulfillment of prophecies. We have the fulfillment of the words of the Nevi'im, which we see before our very eyes. This afternoon, after the events, I was down in Merkaz Ha'ir, in the center of the city at the Rikud Galim. Saw some of you there. And I was there with my kids. And I took a picture of my kids sitting there with all the thousands of people in the background with holding Israeli flags. And these two children sitting there on a bench. And the words of the Navi, Zechariah, Yeladim v'yeladot mesachakim belchovotea. You have children sitting and playing in the streets that are filled with people. It doesn't become any more real than that. This is literally the words of the prophets are being fulfilled in our very eyes. And we have to be blind not to see it. And that is something that's very special. It's very unique, something which we've merited in our generation. I mentioned as well that there's a concept here of Kiddush Hashem, of the sanctification of Hashem's name through what has happened. And I want to share with you this book, which just was published recently. This is a new translation of some of Rav Soloveitchik's drashot that he gave at the Mizrahi conventions. The drashot were given in Yiddish. Yiddish isn't too good, but thankfully they have translated the drashot into English. This was put together by OU Press and Mizrahi. It just come out, hot off the press. And in one of the drashot, I want to share with you some of the words, what Rav Soloveitchik says about this idea and this concept. And he says the following to the Mizrahi. He says, how else can we explain the great miracle that is the state of Israel? Are you really going to tell me that the master of the universe is not building the land of Israel? Heaven forbid. Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. It's the Pasuk in Tehillim. Are you really going to tell me the master of the universe is not defending the land of Israel from its enemies? Who is protecting the land of Israel? The State Department, the Security Council, Churchill, Eden. I wish that all Orthodox Jews, from the Neturei Karta to the Rabbinical Council of America, would grasp that the state of Israel, with all of its deficiencies, has accomplished something that no human fantasy could imagine. In a historic way, it has sanctified God's name in the face of the Christian world. He goes on to explain. Again, I'll read it in his words because he says it much better than I can. He says, during the Hitler era, thousands of missionaries and plain theologians, including the great Karl Barth, would regularly claim that the words of the New Testament and the blood curse of that man, Otoa Ish, were being fulfilled. The Jewish people was being obliterated because it had not accepted the Nazarene. Lectures to this effect could be heard on America's greatest university campuses. Speakers would read aloud chapters from the New Testament and compare them with the facts being reported in the newspapers. I myself had to debate with many Gentiles about this, he says. Jewish boys and girls were being influenced by such messaging. The youth began asking questions, big questions, historic questions. And within the specific climate of the American Jewish community, with its neurotic fear of anti-Semitism and its glorification of Christianity, in which Reformed clergymen played a large part, there loomed the danger of extinction. The Shtiblach of Williamsburg and a proclamation by the Union of Orthodox Rabbis would have helped little in this connection. Jews were on the verge of losing their faith in eternal Israel. And again, he gives us a little bit of perspective here. You know, people ask the question, okay, and you say this is the Geulah. What happened in 48? What happened in 67? This country was built by secular Jews. It's not run according to Torah. Okay. But nonetheless, he says, do you know who, with a single declaration, negated all of their theological claims and arguments? The people assembled at that late Friday afternoon gathering, at which Ben-Gurion presided, and which declared Israel's independence. You know who else? The Jewish army, the girls and boys with their rifles and self-sacrifice. In fact, they put Christian ideology on the defensive. It is an open secret that the opposition to the land of Israel on the part of the Vatican and enemies from certain quarters in America actually derives from a deep awareness that if the state of Israel remains a reality, part of Christian theology is void. Take away the state of Israel, heaven forbid, and a wave of assimilation and apostasy, the likes of which we have never seen before, would inundate American Jewry. The Tituses of yesterday and today would once again bellow, "Where is their God, the rock in whom they sought refuge?" And this cry would echo from one end of the earth to the other. Again, this is not some modern, some new shaliach from Israel. This is Rav Soloveitchik speaking. And again, just giving us a sense of perspective, how religious the state may be. Obviously, it's something we work on. And obviously, it's something we want to improve all the time. But just by the very fact of its existence, just by the very fact of what the state of Israel has done by being here, has achieved so much, has caused such a great Kiddush Hashem, that just by being here, by its very existence, all the more so, in 1967, with what we saw and the miracles, there are people in this room who were there and who were part of it. It's this past weekend, as you know, I was in England. I was in London. We were speaking. We had the privilege of hearing from the chief rabbi, Rabbi Murphys. So he was speaking last week. We mentioned the coronation. I want to share with you an anecdote that he told, and I'll explain how I think it's connected. But he said, so a couple of weeks ago, the chief rabbi went to the coronation of King Charles, which was on Shabbat. It was well documented, and it was all over the press, the Jewish press, the non-Jewish press, that at the end of the ceremony there was a service, which this has never been done before, but different faith leaders who were not of the Christian faith issued a blessing, a universal blessing proclamation to the king. One of them was the chief rabbi. So because it was done on Shabbat, on Saturday, on the Sabbath, so they did it without a microphone. So the entire ceremony, you can watch on YouTube, the entire coronation of the king is there with a microphone. You can hear everything. There's one part at the end, you can't hear a thing because the chief rabbi is there keeping Shabbos and not using the microphone. So the chief rabbi told us that last week he had a reception at his home for newly married couples from the last year. And he said, how many people came up to him and they said, Chief Rabbi, until now we were afraid. They said, until now we were afraid to stand up to tell our employers, on a Friday afternoon, and in the winter in England, Shabbat comes in at 3:00 in the afternoon or something stupid. It's so they said, but now whether they'll follow through with us or not is another question. But they said, now we won't be afraid to go and tell people that we need to leave early. Why? Because everybody knows about Shabbat. Because everybody saw the chief rabbi on TV, saw that the chief rabbi would not use a microphone. And this is something, the Jewish Shabbat, and we can make accommodations. Somebody else came up and said, I'm in university, I'm a student, I have an exam on Shavuot. Again, these are not problems we have to deal with here. But I have an exam that's on this Chag. So you remember, those you last week or the week before, Rabbi Wein told the story when he was in court. And the judge said, right, and he said he can't appear because on Shavuot. The judge said, what are you talking about? That's a made up, there's no such festival. So this person said, Shavuot, I'm not afraid to go and to tell the university, I can't take it, it's a Jewish holiday, because everybody knows about the Jewish faith, because of the chief rabbi. So he was telling us the story to talk about how, that one act, what it had done for Jewish pride, what it had done to give people the ability to stand, with their heads held high. And I say, that is what could happen. Okay, it was the chief rabbi. There was one person in a foreign country in England. When we're not dealing with what happened, what one person did, but what the state of Israel achieved, what the entire world saw, the power, the strength of the Jewish people, saw what that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings his people back and gives. J.J. Shechter said that his father, when he would go and speak, whenever he would speak in Israel after the 6 Day War, he would always conclude, he would say the pasuk, he would say, Hashem oz le'amo yitain, Hashem yevarech et amo b'shalom. He said, we have seen the fulfillment of the first half of the pasuk. Hashem oz le'amo yitain. That has come true. We've seen it. Now we pray for the rest. Right? Hashem yevarech et amo b'shalom. But that is what that is what the state did. And I think sometimes we lose sight of it, and sometimes we forget. And Chazal tell us, "Ein balanes makil b'niso." Somebody who went through a miracle doesn't always recognize it. And but we have at least one day a year, Yom Yerushalayim, to stop, to think, to reflect on what this is. And I want to share with you as well, because when you think about it, and you realize what this has done, and how what these effects have done for Jewish pride, for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. Why is it? Unfortunately, Yom Yerushalayim is not a very widely celebrated day. Certainly not outside of Yerushalayim. So maybe within Yerushalayim itself, I mentioned I was out on the streets. There were thousands of people there. There should have been, tens of thousands more. It should be in every city in Israel. It should be in every Jewish community around the world. Why is it that so many people do not celebrate? Why is it that even amongst the Frum community? So maybe part of it has to do with the following. There is a Meshech Chochmah. Meshech Chochmah in Parshat Beshalach. There's something very, very interesting. This is the Meshech Chochmah that talks about modern technology of the day. Listen. So he says on the pasuk in Shirat Hayam, it says Oseh Pele. Right? Hashem does. Pele means wonders. In modern Hebrew, the word Pele, right? You have a telephone, right? A cell phone is a wonder. It's a miracle, right? Oseh Pele. So he says the Meshech Chochmah here. He quotes the Mechilta, and the Mechilta says Davar Acher Oseh Pele im Avot v'atid la'asot im banim. That Hashem did miracles, did wonders with the ancestors. Right, and he is in the future to do with their descendants as well. He'll do with the fathers, he'll do with the children. He quotes the pasuk from Mincha, another one of the prophets. Just like the days when you left Egypt, you'll see wonders again in the future. Says the Midrash, I will show there will be wonders which were not shown to the fathers, greater miracles, greater than what came before. And so he explains in the following way. He says the word Pele means something which we look at it, we say, well, this is a wonder. This is it's a Pele, right? How many people look at their cell phone and say, wow, this is a wonder, this is wondrous every time you pick it up? We'll explain why in a moment. He relates to that. Doesn't relate to cell phones, but he relates to the technology of his day. So says the Meshech Chochmah like this, Rabbi Simcha Cohen Midvensk. He says when they invented the telegraph, everybody was blown away. Right? This was a Pele. This was a real wonder. This was a miracle. How could it be? Communication from one side of the world to the other. The telegraph. He says, and then what happened? They invented. He writes it here. You can see in the older Hebrew script. Telephone. The telephone. And he points out an amazing fact of human nature. People were not so impressed by the telephone. They were impressed, but the telegraph was. This was something. This was off the charts. This was a Pele. This was wondrous. Telephone. Okay. He says objectively, which is greater, which is more impressive, which is a greater wonder? The telephone, of course. But he says it's human nature. Human nature is that when you have something and that you're used to, that you're very impressed by. So something else comes along. Okay, it's not so new. It's not so, even though objectively it's something greater. But once you already become used to something, it's not as much of a big deal, quote unquote. Once you get used to it, it's not. That's what he says. I'll read you the language. He says, Perush Pele ne'emar davar sheyishpot hasechel, shu lo yachol liot terem shireh beinav. He says, Pele means something which, you wouldn't believe it unless you had seen it. Seeing is believing. V'nei kasher nitvada ledimyon metziut dilug rav, telegraph. He says, when this invention of the telegraph first came along, hayala Pele ve'fli ha'roim. People couldn't have believed it unless they'd seen it. It was wondrous. Omnam, achar zeh ki nitvada telephone. Afterwards, they had a telephone. Even though this is something even more, there's greater wisdom in this. This is more impressive. When people saw it, okay, that's nice. Again, how much more so? I've extended this to our days. You pick up one of these things, right, when they work, and how amazing is it? But we don't think about it. It's just normal. We're born with it. To אחר זה נגדו אינו מוזר ונפלא כל כך מציאות הטלפון. He says, in comparison to that, it's not so amazing. As opposed to when you have seen. He quotes this is in the name of his ancestor. He says, Avi halav Chananya zatzon. I'm not sure halav Chananya was, but that was one of the ancestors of the Meshech Chochmah. And maybe we explain like that. That is the difference between Nes and Teva. When you have something which is a nes, something which is an open, revealed miracle, right? Something you couldn't have imagined without seeing it. It's okay. So everybody is awed and everybody's amazed by it, and everybody thinks it's wonderful. When a miracle happens, which is within nature, that is not so impressive to people. People don't start to take it for granted. And that essentially is what we're dealing with. You think about what happened in 1967. You think about what happened in the past 75 years. I mean, I'm still, Yom Ha'atzmaut, we had the former ambassador to Germany here, spoke here at breakfast. I've been telling people in England about this because I think it's quite remarkable. He spoke about, right, if you remember, those of you who were there, he spoke about the cooperation and the relationship between Israel and Germany. He said when Russia attacked Ukraine and that war began, so Germany began to rethink its defense policy and to rethink its defense strategy, and they started to consult with other countries to get advice in terms of what they should do. So who did they go to? They turned to Israel. Germany turns to Israel, to the Jewish state, for help in terms of how to protect themselves, how to defend themselves, how to build up their army. I mean, Nes v'teva. Just think about that for a moment. Think about those facts. 80 years ago, again, within living memory, people in this room remember it. If you had told them that, what would you have said? The only thing that you possibly could have said is, that's got to be Yemot HaMashiach. That's got to be miraculous. What can it be more than that? So that's what we're living through. There's a Gemara in Shabbat that talks about a very, very interesting story. The Gemara has a story here that says there was a certain man whose wife died. He had a child, he had a young baby, and his wife died, and he was unable to feed the child. He was unable to find anybody to nurse the child. And a miracle he was unable to afford to pay anybody. A miracle was performed for him that he himself was able from his own body. He was able to feed the child. He was able to nurse the child. And there's a machloket in the Gemara that says, was this a good thing or was this a bad thing? There's one opinion in the Gemara that says, look at how great this person was, that Sidrei Breishit, that the order of nature was changed for him. And yet there is another opinion in the Gemara that says, look how lowly this person is, that the order of nature had to be changed for him. Meaning that sometimes you have a situation, sometimes the greatest miracle there is within nature itself. Within nature itself, we can find the ways, and Hashem can provide those things. But if a person doesn't recognize it, such as in this case, he wasn't able to recognize it, wasn't able to receive that bracha, therefore open miracles were done for him, but that was even lower. So there is something to remember and something to think about. Maybe on, as we enter now Yom Yerushalayim, Nisim shebatoch hateva, the miracles that are within nature, which are really to think about them, to reflect upon them, to be grateful for them, and to think about what this day means for us. Rabbi Kenigsberg ben Akasha, Omer, Sakadosh Baruch Hu, Zakot Yisrael, Tichach ba'alem Torah mitzvot, Shneimar Adonai Chavetz Ma'atzit.